There was a surprise indie hit on Steam a few months back. The prehistoric city builder / management sim, Dawn of Man, saw tons of buzz around its release and sold well beyond the developer's expectations. Did you buy it? Is it on your radar but you haven't purchased it yet? Have no idea what Dawn of Man is? Well, it's a pretty good indie game that is well worth a look for those into city builders and management sims. If you liked games like Banished, and you should have definitely liked Banished if you played it, then I would say you should probably give Dawn of Man a look. Now, personally, my favorite PC games are Sid Meier's Civilization and city builders like City Skylines. So coming across a prehistoric city builder like Dawn of Man, it was just such a novel concept and also right up my alley as a gamer. Dawn of Man can be a little bit of a difficult game to figure out, especially as you work your way into the middle sections of the game where the options available to you suddenly explode into a myriad of possibilities. Some of these difficulties can be traced back to the game having a sometimes lackluster UI that makes some of the management more difficult than it really needs to be. The AI could definitely use some work as well. Dawn of Man is an indie game made by, I think 2 people, so I'm willing to let such problems mostly slide, especially since the developers have already said that they are committed to supporting and enhancing the game post-release, and I hope that you can also see past these flaws in order to enjoy the good game underneath. Other difficulties are simply going to be things that you have to experiment with to figure out. I do think that the underlying game deserves a little bit of your time to try to get past the learning curve to see if you start enjoying the game. I've done a bit of experimenting and have published a review on my blog at www.megabearsfan.net, and I'm happy to offer some of my observations and tips and tricks that I've learned. I hope these tips will help you to get into Dawn of Man with less of the headaches and growing pains that I experienced, so that you can get past the annoying stuff and get more into the good stuff that helped to make this such a surprise indie hit. I've written a number of tips and trick posts and strategy guides on my personal blog at www.megabearsfan.net, but this is going to be my first time ever trying a video strategy guide. I'm kind of going to use this as a pilot program, and how well this is received will probably influence whether or not I continue to make video strategy guides in the future, or if I continue to do analysis and critique-like content. If you do like this video, or you like the blog, or both, then I invite you to check out my Patreon page. With support from fans like you, I can produce more and hopefully better content like this on both YouTube and on the blog. As I hit my goal levels, I also intend on making a matching contribution to a charity or non-profit. The way this would work is that I would probably put a poll up on the Patreon site of different organizations or causes that are important to me, and I'll let my patrons decide which specific one I'll make the donation to. Before going into the other tips, I want to recommend that one of the very first things that you should do is to tweak some of the resource limits. You can access resource limits for the relevant resources from any of the production or storage buildings. You can also access a global menu of all resource limits by clicking the Manage button and then the Limits button. This panel can also be opened by using the F4 quick key. This will allow you to set how much of any given resource your people will stockpile before they basically stop collecting or creating it. Food resources should probably always be set to infinity. If you are harvesting too much food and it's decaying before your people can eat it, then instead of reducing the food limits, I suggest you should probably reduce the number of people working in food collecting work areas. I also suggest that you increase the limits for clothing and weapons to 125% of the population. This will ensure that you have enough clothes and weapons to equip any new population that joins your settlement in the future, while still having some spare to hopefully trade away. When you reach the Neolithic or Copper Age, you can reduce the limits of skin and leather clothing, since everyone will transition to cotton and wool clothes. At this point, you can go down to 50% or heck, maybe even 0, since their trade value plummets down to 1. On the other end of the spectrum, the last thing that I suggest you tweak is that you decrease the limits of all animals to just 2 animals. This will prevent your domesticated animal population from exploding out of control and eating all of your hay. The slaughtered animals will also provide your population with some extra food. As your farming capacity grows, you can increase the animal limits accordingly. As you play through the game, feel free to adjust the other resource limits as necessary when your population and your needs change. Work areas are critical to managing larger settlements. Work areas are basically little banners that you place around the map that cause your people to automatically go and work specific areas around that banner, such as collecting stone or harvesting berries and nuts from plants, or hunting animals or fishing or whatever. In the beginning of the game, with just half a dozen people to manage, it's easy enough to give everyone specific orders and keep track of what they're all doing. When you get over like 40 or 50 population, however, you're probably going to need work areas. Don't forget that you can click C or Z on the keyboard to change the size of the work area to cover more ground, and that you can change the number of workers assigned and the limits of how many resources can be collected. It's best to try to keep your work areas as near to your settlement as possible. This reduces the distance your villagers will have to walk. It not only saves time and improves efficiency, but it also reduces the likelihood of a villager being mauled to death by a bear or a wolf on the trek back and forth. As you expand your settlement, you should try to keep sources of renewable resources, such as trees, berries, nuts, and so forth, close to your settlement. Don't cut these resources down, at least not right away. Try to grow your settlement in other directions so that you can keep a close, handy source of food and wood nearby. Keeping large amounts of sledges and other transportation devices will also help your villagers to carry more and further reduce the number of lengthy trips they'll have to take. Build a lot of sledges. Having one sledge for every 3 to 5 people in your settlement might seem like overkill, but trust me, it isn't. You're going to need lots of wood and lots of leather to build sledges, so make sure you keep hunting animals to collect skins, and make sure you have your skin dryers and tanners running, and that you're collecting tannin in the spring from pine trees in order to keep a steady supply of leather coming. Sledges and other transportation devices have a limited lifespan. They will eventually break after excessive use. As such, I recommend that you stagger the production of sledges. This way, even when they do start breaking, they won't all break at once, and you'll still have plenty of usable sledges while you wait for replacements to be constructed. I cannot stress this next point enough. Avoid using hunting areas. Seriously, from my experience, the hunting areas in this game suck. All the other work areas work fine, but not the hunting work areas. The hunting work areas are probably the single most inefficient things in the entire game, and one of my biggest source of frustrations with the AI. The core problem is that sending a single hunter out to hunt pretty much any animal is a bad idea in general. Most of the animals will run away, and most of them can outrun a person. I had no idea pigs could run that fast. Sometimes you'll get lucky, but it's a real crapshoot. The hunters that go automatically to a hunting area almost always wander out one at a time, and then they either fail to catch the animal altogether, don't have enough inventory space to carry all the meat and skins back, or they get themselves killed by an errant bear or wolf during the long trek back to camp. By the middle of the game, animals also seem to have learned to stay away from humans, so they spawn further and further away from my camp and seem to become more skittish. I don't know if this is just like confirmation bias on my part, or if this is an actual mechanic in the game. Only time will tell. But I've also seen hunters die while they're out hunting because they chase prey for so long that they don't have time to get back to camp before they either starve to death, or they freeze to death, or they die of dehydration. You can make up for these deficiencies of AI by micromanaging your hunting parties, and it can be kind of a tedious pain in the ass, but it will save you a lot of trouble later on down the road. You can hold the H key on your keyboard while clicking and dragging over your settlement to only select people who have hunting weapons. Use this to select a group of people to send out on hunting expeditions. I recommend sending out hunting parties of no less than 3 villagers. If you have the manpower to spare, I suggest sending groups as large as 6 or 7 hunters so that you can hunt and kill multiple large prey animals. Have all the people meet up at a waypoint, and then send them all to the prey as a single group. As you approach your prey, pause the game and cancel the hunt task, if you had assigned a hunt task to begin with. Then, select each of your hunters 1 or 2 at a time and try to manually position them in order to surround the animal that you are trying to hunt. Creating a triangle around the prey should be sufficient to block off its escape routes. Once all 3 hunters are in position, drag to select them all, and then double-click on the target to order the group to hunt it. If the animal runs from the first hunter, then it should hopefully run right into the waiting spear or bow of another hunter. With multiple hunters throwing spears or shooting arrows, you should have no trouble taking down the animal before it runs past and escapes. Ideally, you want to kill the animal before any of your hunters has to chase it down, as running will very quickly drain your people's stamina. If you can pin the animal against a rock outcropping, lake, or river, then even better. If the animal has to swim to get away, then you should be easily able to kill it before it swims out of range of your throwing spears and arrows. But whatever you do not ever approach prey from across a river. Your hunters will have to swim, which will prevent them from attacking while the prey runs away. It's also actually not a bad idea to go after animals that fight back, the dangerous animals that are highlighted in orange or red in Primal Vision. Surrounding them is a lot less important. These animals will likely repeatedly attack the first hunter who attacks it, rather than running away. If you have more than 3 hunters with the best weapons available, they should easily take down most dangerous animals before the animal can kill any of your hunters. For bigger and stronger animals like the mammoths, you might want to have between 4 and 6 hunters. In fact, once you have the manpower and weapons available, it actually isn't a bad idea to just focus on hunting dangerous prey whenever possible. The adult aurochs, bears, and mammoths will all stand their ground and fight back, in my experience, and they provide a lot of meat, skins, and bone resources. Once you have the capability to go after such large game without unduly risking the lives of your hunters, don't even bother trying to chase down the more nimble and skittish deer and goats and pigs anymore. Lastly, you should be opportunistic when hunting. Occasionally, you might notice a group of animals wandering right through your settlement, or crossing through a route that is heavily trafficked by your people, or swimming across a lake or a river. If this happens, by all means, select a group of people and go ahead and try to kill the animals. This should provide you with an easy source of food and skins. And if you happen to see an animal swimming across a lake or a river, that is a perfect opportunity to ambush and kill it. If you have 1 or more people armed with weapons at the shore where the animal is swimming to, then you can quickly select them and order them to hunt the animal. Swimming animals do not turn around when they start getting attacked. They'll just keep swimming right at you until they get to the shore, and you should be able to kill them by the time they make it to shore. I also strongly recommend that you do not rush the game or the development of technology. It might be tempting to research new knowledge whenever you have enough points to do so, but it might not be the best idea. Generally, in the early stages of the game, it is a good idea, as each new technology will unlock something very valuable. However, as you get into the Neolithic era and beyond, it might be wise to pace yourself. The game kind of explodes with content in the Neolithic and Copper Age, and it can be difficult to keep up with all the new stuff you've unlocked. You'll get farming, animal domestication, fortifications, mining, and so forth, all in the same era. If you try to do all of this stuff at once, as soon as it's available to you, you'll likely overload your workforce and get yourself caught in a downward spiral of excessive workloads. Additionally, progressing through the eras has other effects on the overall game. Animals such as the woolly mammoth and woolly rhino will go extinct during the, Bronze Age. These animals are very big game that provide a lot of food and skins, so losing access to them by teching too fast will force you to have to hunt more, smaller game. More importantly, the frequency and destructiveness of raider attacks will increase as you progress through the eras. In fact, going into the Metal Age will even bring up a little dialogue warning asking you if you're sure you want to advance the eras. I'll be talking more about raiders a little bit later. First, however, I also want to recommend that you do not want to rush to try to get a bunch of domesticated animals right away. You will unlock dog domestication very early in the game. The dogs are low maintenance. You don't really have to do anything extra to maintain them. The low maintenance of the dogs can actually lull you into a false sense of food security with the larger stock and pack animals. Stock and pack animals consume a lot of food. You should try to have a pretty robust farming infrastructure with lots of stockpiled food and hay before you attempt to start capturing goats, sheep, pigs, cows, donkeys, or horses. If you have at least one male and one female of a species, then they will also periodically reproduce. I recommend only keeping one female animal at first. You can keep multiple males, but slaughter any other female animals so that they don't reproduce out of control and eat all of your crops. Speaking of crops, you should take advantage of the fact that you know more than your Neolithic farmers do. Even though they shouldn't be learning how to rotate their crops for, I think, thousands of years, that doesn't mean that you should not rotate your crops. Do not plant a crop adjacent to another field of the same crop. Planting the same crop in adjacent fields increases the risk that a blight may spread to an adjacent field. Ideally, you should also try to alternate your fields between crops that grow in different seasons. The cereal crops like barley and emmer are planted in the spring, grow in the summer, and are harvested in the fall. The bean or pod crops like peas and lentils are planted in the winter, grow in the spring, and are harvested in the summer. If you plant a cereal crop in one field, then it might be a good idea to plant a pod crop in the field adjacent. The plants will be growing and will be harvested in different seasons, and will thus be much less likely to spread a blight to each other if they do get infected. To be honest, I'm not actually even sure if cereal crops can spread blight to a pod crop or vice versa. I've yet to see that happen in-game, so maybe this isn't necessary, but it might be good practice anyway in case that gets patched into the game later. Now it's time to talk about the promised raiders. Raiders will become more and more prolific as you advance through the eras. Make sure you have adequate defenses. Do not advance to a new era unless you have most, if not all, of your population equipped with the best weapons available in the current era. That is, unless you play the game on hardcore mode, in which case the raiders will advance at their own rate, and you will actually want to advance your weapon and defense technologies as soon as possible. Once you unlock fortifications in the Neolithic era, you should definitely try to fortify your settlement as soon as possible. The watchtowers seem like the best way to go, but the watchtowers are actually really kind of crap. What you really just need are walls, gates, and the defensive platforms. This is because the watchtowers are frustratingly weak. I've seen just like 2 or 3 raiders quickly take down a watchtower before the watchtower can kill any of the raiders. So if you are going to build watchtowers, and you probably should still build some, but you're going to want to build them in clusters, probably near your gates. The game doesn't bother to label their firing ranges when you build them, so you'll have to do a little bit of experimenting to try to figure out the range. From my experience, watchtowers are effective at ranges of 5 to 6 tiles. Build multiple watchtowers with overlapping areas at choke points such as bridges and gates and mountain passes in order to fend off raiders. But in reality, your best defense against raiders is going to be an armed population and defensive platforms positioned behind your walls. Seriously, that's the way to go. This last little tip should be kind of self-explanatory and a bit of a no-brainer, but I want to put it out there anyway. Periodically, a trader will show up with various goods that you can barter for. These traders each have a commission that's listed in the top left of the trade panel, and that commission determines how much of a markup their goods will cost. The higher the commission, the more they will demand in trade for their goods. Obviously, you should try to avoid bartering with the high commission traders, unless you are desperate for the resources that they are offering. You should especially avoid buying very expensive items like a new technology or an animal. Instead, try waiting for the low or average commission trader to come by. They might not have the same items, but you'll still get a much better deal. Well, I hope these tips will help you build a prehistoric settlement that will stand the test of time. If this strategy video ends up being successful, then you can expect to see more like it. Maybe some strategy guides for Civilization Gathering Storm or for City Skylines. So we'll see. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and share if you enjoyed what you saw.